which I've decided to title Work, Slight Work, the Perceived Impact of Federal Work Study on Student Well-Being, to ask, which is my research question, the role of federal work study program in promoting student well-being. And so student well-being in the conception of my research design is measured by student perception. And so after much consideration on other topics in higher education, I've decided to focus on this area of study because it deals with college affordability and also student college experience. And so federal work study is sort of the perfect combination of these two aspects, because it contains federal work study contains this dimension of college affordability as a form of financial aid, but it also has, in its work study component, there's sort of a student experience, potential social capital to be gained by a student working on campus. So for that reason, I found work study to be a particular point of interest. And then I also found the topic to be, generally relevant because of the rising costs of higher education, and also the difficulty families have in navigating the application process for financial aid, basically in navigating the many kinds of financial aid that might be available to them, and sort of knowing what's best for themselves. And so I know work study is not considered a really significant portion of anyone's financial aid, but given its unique qualities, it seems like something worthy of study. And so I know as an employee at the Trinity College Financial Aid Office, I had my own skepticisms about sort of the success of financial aid programs, the benefits that students truly receive in receiving certain kinds of financial aid. And so also, what sacrifice comes, at the student's expense in some of these forms of financial aid. And then I guess another important reason for this type of research, if for no other reason, our public dollars are directly related to federal financial aid. And so our public dollars should be accountable to us in some way because they're spent on this cause. And so the programs, at least in my mind, should be functioning successfully. So I guess to continue on why this topic is significant, one particular person who was included in my research, James Hearn, noted an interesting paradox in the way financial aid had grown since the mid-1960s, but how the programs themselves sort of remained unchanged. So there was this unusual growth, but at the same time stagnation in these programs. So it sort of makes me wonder, are the programs as they exist today, successful, or should they have been changed in the 1960s or 70s, once all this funding was being allocated to them, but in fact there was no change. So that is sort of the climate that's surrounding this research, in addition to my personal experience, in a financial aid office, and as a student who's sort of dealt on one side and now the other side of financial aid. So, in executing my research, I've decided to have anonymous survey questionnaires sent to 6 schools in Connecticut, 3 private and 3 public. And so it would be administered to sophomores and seniors. And so I'm hoping in surveying sophomores, I'm sort of eliminating the transfer dropout population that might be included in freshmen, and I'm also eliminating some of the anxieties or students that don't work because they're still acclimating to college life as a freshman. So that's sort of just my participant sample, And so in defining my area of research through the surveys, my dependent variable, as I mentioned as part of my research, is going to be student well-being, and my independent variable would be the receipt of a federal work-study award. And so the way that I've sort of conceptualized well-being is sort of a multi-layered, multiple dimensions to this idea of well-being. So questions that helped me formulate survey questions were, what fuels a student's propensity to work under federal work study? What are the primary and secondary rewards of federal work study? And, what are the opportunity costs of federal work study as realized by the student? Because, again, I'm looking for the student perception, which is something many of the researchers I looked at note is missing. Student perception is not considered nearly as much as some researchers think it should be. So, again, dealing with student well-being, I'm sort of addressing within this concept of well-being, there's a financial component. So, what are the, financial benefits of work study, or, conversely, what are the financial pitfalls of federal work study? And then secondly, well-being is sort of defined to have this experiential, emotional, social capital component. So what might ordinarily be considered the secondary effects, but maybe not necessarily as perceived by the student. So these are sort of the dimensions that are wrapped up in what I'm considering well-being. So there's a monetary, financial component, as well as this sort of intangible, non-monetary component. And so basically I'm looking for, the differences in sort of reward, like financial reward, or again, social reward as perceived by the student. And then, as an example, one way that I would measure that is by asking students, it's sort of like the replaceability that they might elect to have in like replacing their work study with a different form of aid. And so I'm assuming, or I guess as I'm hypothesizing, this well-being dimension will be directly related to the financial stressors that a student demonstrates. So in that way, I don't want to go too long here, but that is sort of my research in a nutshell, looking at student well-being as triggered by certain financial and non-financial components of the college experience, and also financial stressors. So, although I do not plan to execute this research, it was very interesting to get this far, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have by email, or not at all if no one watches this, but thanks.